Hello, I am Dr. Rajnesh Kumar Pandey, working as an assistant professor in Tecnia Institute of Advanced Studies. Today, I am going to speak on the topic multiple aspects related to barriers of communication. Now, barriers of communication. There are several obstacles in the way of communication. A condition of misinterpretation and failure of communication will result from communication that is not valid. The process of communication has multiple barriers. The intended communique will often be disturbed and distorted, leading to a condition of misunderstanding and failure of communication. The barriers to effective communication could be of many types like physical, language or linguistic, psychological, emotional, mechanical and cultural etc. Below, we will go through each of these types in more detail. First of all, physical barriers. A physical barriers to communication can be defined as an element or a physical factor that acts as a distraction to hinder the flow of communication. A physical barrier can be natural or human-made and easy to spot. Noise, bad architecture and closed doors are all physical barriers to listening. Even a network disturbance due to a thunderstorm can be considered as one of the examples of physical barrier. Factors that can create a physical barrier: surroundings, distance between people, time differences and faulty modes of communication are all factors that can create a physical barrier. Executives must be quick to identify these factors to deal with their negative effects on productivity. Let's look at the causes behind physical barriers. Workplace architecture. A poorly designed workplace can create a physical barrier. Employees find it difficult to communicate with their seniors if they sit far away or on different floors. Cabins and guarded work areas prevent teams from operating smoothly. Communication in such places relies on emails and calls, and that creates noise and distortions. Accessibility becomes a concern and communication suffers. Uncomfortable chairs, glaring scenes and dim lighting are all characteristics of a workplace and contribute to physical barriers. Now, distance. Geographical distance is a major cause of physical barriers. It prevents personal communication, which is substituted by phone calls, video conferences, messages or emails. Network issues are common and long distance communication can experience obstacles of poor reception or slow internet. Sending hard copies of documents takes time and delays the process of communication. Now, time. Limited time or different time zones can both create a physical barrier between two people. The sender must construct a concise message for the receiver if time is limited. This ensures conveying the crucial information in the absence of a detailed conversation. Executives need to ensure their messages carry the relevant information to prevent delays. People or organizations located in different time zones need to coordinate to have conversations. A video conference between teams from England and India has to take place at a time that suits both parties since they are separated by over 5 hours. Now, environment. Environmental conditions can affect the flow of information. Thunder can create noise that interferes with hearing. Lightning and heavy rain can cause faults in mainframes and disturbances in signals. Heat can cause fires that can damage wiring or lead to fires. Cold temperatures can also disrupt communication by freezing lines and open systems. Now, technical disturbances. A major cause for physical barriers is disturbance in mediums or technical issues. Technology is a great tool to break time and distance barriers to establish communication, but technical disturbances can happen at any time. A faulty phone will create noise or suppress volume. A broken fax machine can prevent a message from coming through. A defective printer can prevent storage of hard copies of data, and a crash in the system will delete all the unsaved information. These factors create several types of physical barriers that obstruct the flow of communication. Now, examples of physical barrier in communication. Communication can be affected by a noisy machine in the office or poor Wi-Fi strength. The closed door of a cabin can act as a physical barrier for an employee trying to reach their manager. There can be different types of physical barriers such as bad lighting, old and broken equipment, or uncomfortable room temperatures. Let's look at some examples of physical barrier in communication that filter information and restrict communication. Noise. A loud, unpleasant sound or a disturbance in an audio signal can be termed as noise. Noise is one of the most common physical barriers to listening. It interrupts communication by acting as a disturbance in the environment or the medium of communication. Noise restricts the flow of messages, makes them inaccurate or unclear, and causes misinterpretations. Noise can be environmental, technological, or written. Environmental noise relates to loudness in the background of the speaker or receiver. It can be loud sounds coming from outside or a distracting whirring of the office printer. Technological noise is a disturbance in the medium of communication that interferes with the audio signals. A defective phone will not establish effective communication between two people. A poorly constructed written or printed message is an example of written noise. Excessive information. Communication can suffer if the volume of information is too high or a person to store or process. The sender may have lots of material to share but not the means to process them. The receiver will face the same problem if they are not equipped to handle excess information. Not being able to send or receive huge volumes of printed data as much as a physical barrier, as low storage capacity and backdated systems are. Distortion. A distorted message is one that is misrepresented or misinterpreted. It happens when the meaning of a message is lost in translation, in transition, or during decoding. Human perception also plays a part in distorting messages. Language or linguistic barriers. Language or linguistic barriers are the most common types of communication barriers in the workplace. It causes misunderstandings and misinterpretations among co-workers, straining their interpersonal relationships. However, language is needed for any kind of communication, whether it's verbal, non-verbal, or even sign language. The inability to communicate using language makes way for language barriers. It refers to the challenge faced by people or groups speaking different languages and dialects. In some cases, linguistic barriers primarily occur because people speaking different languages are unable to understand one another. There is a breakdown in language and communication, but the scope of linguistic barriers to communication extends beyond that. There are subtle differences caused by a particular industry. For example, using technical jargon at work can get challenging, or a recruit not using the right words can strain an employee's experience and lead to loss of morale and diminished job satisfaction. Additionally, there are culture-based language barriers that can create obstacles. What may be considered polite in one culture may be considered rude in another. Or example, using direct language when speaking to supervisors may be considered rude in some cultures. This may prevent employees from speaking up and providing feedback to their managers. Even non-verbal cues such as body language, gestures, and facial expressions carry different meanings. It's important to be mindful of these things when interacting with a diverse workforce. Now, physiological barriers. Physiological barriers to communication are obstacles that impact effective communication because of the condition of the human body and mind. Physical and mental conditions play crucial roles in determining how to effectively convey messages or interpret them. Poor physiological conditions can affect a person's ability to communicate. Physiological barriers to communication act as sieves that limit the flow of information and create confusion. Some of the conditions that create physiological barriers are health complications or physical disabilities. Poor hearing and speech impairments are both examples of physiological barriers. A physical disability is a barrier that people may be born with. Physical shock or trauma can lead to similar conditions later in life, affecting a person's well-being. Now, examples of physiological barriers. Physiological barriers in communication stem from personal discomfort. People may find it difficult to communicate if they are experiencing poor mental health, if they have an illness, or they are limited by a physical disability. Quite often, people with physiological barriers need assistance in writing or speaking fluently to effectively convey their messages. Their inability to structure concise messages and interpret them appropriately can stand in their way. Have a look at these examples to better understand the meaning of barriers to effective communication. Speech impairments. Speech is one of the most effective tools for communication. Speech impairments, however, can disrupt speech, while some impairments affect the fluency of speech. Others may prevent a speech altogether. These occur when nerves and muscles required for speech are affected. A person can become speech impaired if the area of the brain responsible for controlling speech is damaged from birth or in the event of an accident or stroke. Few examples of speech impairments are muteness is the inability to speak. Speech sound disorder is the ability to produce specific sounds. Apraxia is inconsistent production of sound or rearranging sounds in a word. It's caused by illness or a stroke. Cluttering is a speech fluency disorder that exhibits a rapid rate of speech. Hearing impairment. Vibrations from sound waves are conducted as impulses by the brain that allows us to hear. When the ear or part of the brain that processes sound impulses is damaged, a person can suffer a hearing impairment. Hearing impairment are the most common cause for physiological barriers to listening. They can be partial, complete, or progressive. They can impact social development, language, and communication. Some causes of hearing impairments are a damaged eardrum, infections, aging, genetics, or exposure to loud noise. Now, body language issues. Physical issues can cause body language that's distracting for others. This may be a problem for either the listener or the speaker. Depending on the underlying cause of the issues, it may or may not be possible to address these. Now, getting distracted. Listening to someone else speak is a more complex task than it appears. The number of words that a listener can process in a minute is much higher than the number of words spoken. This means that a person can easily get distracted, lose patience, or not pay attention to what's being said. It's easy for a person to be involved in other activities while they are listening, which causes them to lose focus. If either the speaker or the listener is restricted by a physiological disability, it can disrupt effective communication even more. Now, poor memory. The human brain is not designed to hold volumes of information, but to retain the most important segments of what it takes in. To make communication effective, people need to retain key information and recall it when needed. The ability to hold important information and recall when necessary is known as the retention capacity of the brain. The inability of a person to recall information is a result of poor memory or disorders and a major cause of physiological barriers. Now, selective perception and interpretation and attention. A person's physiological state decides whether they will be attentive and how they will perceive and interpret information. Poor mental health due to stress, depression, shock, denial, or emotional trauma will affect the body and the way a person interprets messages. They will be less alert toward finer details and will miss the opportunity to effectively establish context. A similar effect on a person as they lose the ability to attentive and establish communication. A person with physiological barriers caused by poor health will be selective about processing information. Sleep deprivation can have a similar effect. A person who meets with an accident will be disoriented from impact and shock, which will prevent them from communicating effectively. These can even be caused by workplace-related events or outside stressors. Now, emotional barriers. The meaning of emotional barriers is quite simple and is exactly how it sounds. An emotional barrier is a mental limitation that prevents you from openly communicating your thoughts and feelings. It has the potential of preventing you from being your authentic self as it affects your emotions and feelings. An emotional barrier to communication is often the result of low emotional intelligence, also known as emotional awareness or control. However, a better understanding of our feelings and emotions can help us communicate better. Overcoming emotional barriers is not easy because emotions act as powerful motivators. Not only can they guide us toward our passion, but also keep us out of danger. For example, taking an unknown turn on the street causes fear and will make us think twice before we decide to venture on the road not taken. But at the same time, when left unchecked, emotions can lead us astray. Emotional roadblocks can lead to miscommunication, hurt feelings, and severe ties in various aspects of life. This is why it's essential to keep your emotions in check and find ways to navigate them. Here are the various types of emotional barriers that keep us from healthy and effective communication. You'll also learn how each emotional barrier impacts you and others around you. The first one is anger affects thinking. Imagine you are having a heated argument with someone. You may lash out, saying hurtful things that you didn't mean. Anger can affect the way you behave because your mind processes information in a different way. When anger affects thinking, you are likely to express yourself in unhealthy ways, negatively impacting your interpersonal relationships. Pride interferes with listening. Pride is an emotional barrier that influences the way you perceive others. It prevents you from focusing on anyone's views and opinions other than your own. For example, you are likely to dominate a conversation because you don't value what the other person is saying. This prevents you from hearing out what others have to say or contribute to a conversation. Now, anxiety causes distractions. Anxiety and fear are common emotions when it comes to communication. There are various types of anxiety that influences an individual's communication skills and styles. For example, social anxiety can prevent you from approaching strangers at a party. Generic anxiety can make public speaking seem like an ordeal. Mechanical barriers. Now, mechanical barriers is also one of the important barriers. Let's see. A mechanical barrier of communication is caused by a flaw in the machinery or instruments used to convey the message. Mechanical communication obstacles include loud communication, machines or instruments, lack of communication instruments, transmission, interruption, and power outrage. Cultural barriers. Now, cultural barriers, which is also one of the important barriers of communication. Let's see. Going from one country, city or town to another can be difficult. When there's work to be done, when we get there, it's even harder. Some people assume all cultures are more similar than they actually are, or even if they are aware of the differences, dealing with them sensitively is difficult for them. While we all have a lot of common, there is also much that separates us, particularly in the workplace, and communication is often the first problem to arise as a result. While handling examples of cultural barriers to communication, it's important to determine if the issue is socio-cultural one or a cross-cultural one. A socio-cultural barrier occurs at the level of the group or social group. Cross-cultural communication barriers occur at the level of individual. Understanding which type is present will reveal what specific barriers to communication to solve. For example, if a manager can communicate with a team of Chinese speakers because he can speak Mandarin but cannot communicate with a French speaker because he cannot speak French, then it's easy to recognize the issue. For instance, a manager may not understand how to process a request from a colleague if he does not know how his colleague communicates. With a socio-cultural barrier, the message may be understood, but a barrier exists in the receiving party's ability to respond. It can even occur between two people who belong to the same culture. It can be caused by confusion or discomfort about how to express oneself respectfully. There are cultures, for instance, where hierarchy plays an important part in society, in which a junior will hesitate before contradicting a senior. That's a socio-cultural barrier. The meaning of cultural barriers is easy to grasp. We have all had trouble understanding the culture of another person at some point in our lives. While trying to understand the meaning of a message, the receiver interprets it from his or her own culture perspective. While the receiver may grasp the individual words that make up a message, they may not comprehend its overall meaning. This causes confusion and anxiety because receivers can't act appropriately. People who are unaware of the cultural barrier may also communicate inappropriately using unacceptable verbal and non-verbal cues, leading to even greater misunderstanding. I hope you like this video. Please like, share and subscribe Tecnia TV. Thank you.